we'll open the talks for discussion. But first, I'd like to ask Peter a question. I noticed in your slides of the CEA registry that you had drugs, procedures, and devices, if I remember correctly. And by far, the smallest, I think it was orange or red or something like that, even from up close, I could barely discern very much color in that. How does that bode for the medical device people going forward? And more importantly, are there structural issues from a methodologic perspective that might limit the ability of this industry to do appropriate cost effectiveness or comparative effectiveness studies?
Right. So about I think it's 45% of all cost effectiveness studies, and 45% are pharmaceuticals. Another 5% or so are devices. Now the rest are really a combination of everything else. We have immunizations and public health programs and various kinds of procedures, and even what you might call education programs for healthcare. So devices are only 5%. Now, maybe that's surprisingly small, is what you're asking. And I think we could also point out that the pharmaceutical category is surprisingly large. Why is it 45% of all cost-effectiveness analyses are pharmaceuticals? Pharmaceuticals are 10-12% of health spending. Well, it's likely because reimbursement concerns have been driving those cost-effectiveness analyses for pharmaceuticals. In some cases, payers worldwide are requesting them. Certainly the pharmaceutical companies, I think, see an opportunity or a necessity in funding studies. So, I think why we haven't seen more in the device world is an interesting question. We are seeing more. I do think the device cost-effectiveness analyses are a bit different than the other cost-effectiveness analyses, if for no other reason than the evidence base is typically different. I mean, device is a broad category and encompasses a lot of things, but many devices will not come to the market with the same kind of large randomized controlled trials that the pharma companies will have, which makes it somewhat more difficult to then do the cost-effectiveness analyses. You certainly still could do them, and people do them. It just means making more assumptions. It means synthesizing the evidence. It means doing more modeling. So I don't know if that addresses your question directly, but those are my thoughts.
Well, I guess I had a couple of sort of follow-on issues. I mean, one of the things that, and I think if you dichotomize the medical device industry and the AdvaMed people are probably all grasping their stomachs when I do this, but if you just broadly just go into, not dichotomize, but really three pieces: imaging, diagnostics, and then everything else. I would guess, with no information, that most of the cost-effectiveness studies that are in your registry are comparisons of drug-eluting stents to bare metal stents, i.e. the cardiovascular area, followed by comparisons between various imaging technologies, and everything else is a way distant third. And part of so that's just my, again, ignorance is bliss, and I'm just saying that. The problem that we confronted when actually InHealth took a look at this is what I call the Lucy in the football phenomenon, which is that there's such constant innovation in the medical device side that to do a cost effectiveness analysis, and you pointed it out in your talk, is you never can quite get the right comparator. And therefore, the payers can say, well, guys, you didn't use the right comparator. The companies can say, well, gee whiz, why are you holding us to that standard? We now have version 2.3, which is much better than version 1, which is what you guys looked at the data for. So I guess my question as to you as kind of an expert methodologist is, what would you advise the folks in this room as to how to deal with that? And what sort of talking points can you give to Steve to help him get his First Amendment rights effectively in place for his clients?
Okay. So first of all, we certainly can go and look at the data, the actual cost-effectiveness analyses, and actually document what's in there in the device category. So we can answer that question. It wouldn't take us that long. It's probably right. It's stents and imaging, PET and MRI and other imaging. ICDs, certainly the implantable defibrillators are in there, and there's a lot of other things. And parenthetically, it's not always clear how we categorize something, because a lot of these devices have procedures around them, and whether it's a procedure or a device, we typically will call it a device if it is a device. So what would I advise? I think you do point out another difference or two about devices and, say, drugs. Certainly incremental innovation. I think that is a key difference. The other differences that are often pointed out with devices that make them harder to study are learning effects or operator issues, and it's true with diagnostics. It may well be true with certain devices, and perhaps there are other differences that are important that we would need to think through. So I think the implications are it's hard to do randomized trials, certainly long-term big randomized trials in a lot of these devices because of these issues. If you have, by the time you do that device, the next generation, do the trial, the next generation will come out. So I think it speaks to the need for other types of evidence. And that means claims data, observational data, registries, syntheses of evidence from different sources. It means models. And I think, over time, the people who do the comparative effectiveness reviews and, likely the reimbursement people who use that evidence to make decisions will appreciate that at some level. They probably need a lot of education about that, and maybe there are ways to do that. But I think that's extremely important.
Can I make one quick?
Please.
Just based on my experience working on Capitol Hill, I think there traditionally has not been much of an understanding of the difference between drug and device innovation and the need to have sensitivity to those differences as you think about comparative effectiveness. I will say I think that at least on the Hill and probably to a greater extent in the agencies, that is changing due to the work that Steve and AdvaMed his team at AdvaMed are doing, as well as other companies in the industry who have a presence here. But from my experience in the health insurance industry as well, I was surprised at just how little of an appreciation in the health insurance industry on the part of payers there is for those differences as well. I thought it was just a Capitol Hill thing that we lay people, staffers on Capitol Hill can't grasp it, but there are some very smart people in the payer community with lots of initials after their names who are starting to come around, but have until recently not really appreciated those differences as well. So there's work to do there, not just on the Hill.